folder in the, I'm not sure which budget is, but it is in the Washington State, maybe it's the Senate side, for studying governance for the bi-state bridge compact. So on the Oregon side, legislative staff will begin reviewing concepts after the current legislation or current legislature is complete. So at this point, we're still on course for 2022 legislation being submitted to both state legislatures. And then I did want to just mention the tribal outreach section of my report. You know, that we're starting to see a really healthy thaw in the tribal interaction with these projects. And I want to just earmark that item for later on in the agenda for the committee membership, and maybe have a conversation a little bit later about seeing if there's an opportunity to expand the bi-state working group. So I don't know if you have any questions on anything that you've seen in the front part of that packet or agenda, but I can certainly answer any questions or take any comments that you might have. All right.
Kevin.
Oh, yeah.
This is Kate.
Hi.
On the money buckets, would it be possible, and I know, you know, who knows when we'll get money, but could you put something together in writing that would put those amounts to those names and some kind of time frame? And I know it's impossible time frame, but just, you know, between this year and this year, and, you know, would get a determination by X time, even if it's a range of time, just so we have some clue that it's not like 5 years out or
Sure.
Whatever it is. It would be really helpful to have that in writing and those numbers.
Absolutely, Mayor. I can certainly do that. For these congressional requests, the deadline's Friday. So we actually submitted the Representative Bent's request last week, and assuming Klickitat County wants to do the same, we'll be able to modify the Bent's request for Herrera Butler, and so that would be coming up at the end of this week. So, but I'll produce a written summary of what we know as of today, and then I can distribute that after this meeting.
Okay, and then the request for the Build Back Better stuff, will there be official requests going in for that to, you know, specific people, or how will that work?
Well, I think there's still a lot of unknowns regarding that. I know on the Washington side, and I don't know if I saw it specifically on the Oregon side, Senator Murray, maybe about 2 months ago, submitted a request for transportation projects. And so I think the Port of Klickitat, maybe the city of White Salmon or others submitted $75 million placeholders for the bridge to Senator Murray. I don't know. I don't think I ever saw a similar request coming from either Merkley or Wyden's office. Michael McElwee, did you happen to see any? Did we get anything? I don't think we did from the Oregon contingency.
No, but our intent is to get similar requests into Senators Wyden and Merkley's office in this round. But I'd say with Build Back Better, or whatever it's called, just the very early contours of that legislation are known. The last I remember is that they're conceptually trying to target 10 major projects nationally for significant funding, and then 10,000 projects aside from those that are more modest or more local. I think they're still trying to develop any kind of detail relative to that, but through Summit Strategies, we're monitoring, and we'll be monitoring that as it unfolds.
Thank you.
So, you know, with that, this, like I said, this next agenda item was to be the first review of a finance plan, and Commissioner Everett from the Port of Hood River, that was a top priority of his. And so I believe all of you received a copy of Steve's PDF of his PowerPoint presentation. So I don't know if there were any comments or questions without Steve being here. If you wanted to make some statements or comments, I could write those down and kind of compile those for Steve when he's able to come back to the project. Were there any initial thoughts based upon what you received in your packet?
I don't know that I received that. When was that emailed?
That was Monday. You didn't have a huge amount of time to study it.
Yes, yesterday. Is that what you're saying?
No, it was Monday.
Oh, day before yesterday. Okay.
Yeah. There should have been, I believe, 6 different PDFs.
Did it come through you?
Yes. Did anybody else receive those?
I see it came with the invitation.
It was with the Zoom login info, I believe, if I recall.
That came on Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was about late afternoon on Monday. There were 6 PDFs there. I can certainly resend that to you, Mayor.
I don't think I got it. I'm looking through all my emails for Monday.
It would have been, I showed a 4:43.
Nope. Let's see here. Maybe it went into my spam.
Well, I hope not.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, I just emailed it over. I just forwarded it to you again,
Okay, thanks. To my city email?
to the city one, correct?
And I sent it as well. So but maybe that's good that we'll have a little bit of extra time to review those before Steve's able to present.
Yeah,
Did you
still hasn't come through, but
If you do have comments, I'll follow up with you after the meeting, Mayor, just to make sure that
okay.
you get it. So I guess with that, Chuck, are you still there?
I am still here.
So we're moving you up in the agenda a little bit. Are you ready to do your presentation on the Ae Design Rfp?
I am. So let me share my screen and open my PowerPoint. And while I do that, now when I go into my PowerPoint show, I will not be able to see hands raised. So Kevin, I might ask you or just anybody, if you have questions, just jump right in.
Yeah, I'll monitor the chat or the participants.
All right, so it should be up on screen now. Is that confirmation, Kevin? You can see that,
Yep.
others?
Yep.
All right. So thank you. And I would like to give you an update of this engineering consultant procurement. There's been a bunch of work happening over the last couple of months, since you might have caught snippets of presentations or updates in the past. So I wanted to go through and give you where we are with this and kind of a heads up of things to come relatively soon. There are going to be some definitions or some topics that I mentioned, and I wanted to give you a brief definition of what those mean. So when I talk about engineering consultant or A&E, A&E stands for architecture and engineering. So that's the team we're looking at procuring for this next design phase in the project. The design that's been done so far is what I like to call a footprint design. Essentially, it's 30,000 foot kind of a concept to understand what the environmental impacts might be of the preferred alternative. The next stage is to take that and bring it down a little bit more to like the 10,000 foot, what we call the preliminary engineering, or some people term that to 15% design. And then the outcome of this next phase, it was what we call design acceptance package. That's actually an ODOT used term. Washington has something similar to that, but it's basically where we establish the proof of concept. We have design approvals as far as parameters and the preferred alternative alignment and concept. And it's a jumping off point, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Beyond that is when we get into what we call the advanced design. That's where we take it further eventually to what we call construction drawings, or if you're in the engineering business, the term is PS&E, or plan specifications and estimates. That's what the bid package becomes. This is going to be a request for proposal procurement, and so I'll be talking about RFP as well. Some related definitions. Owner's representative is typically when you get a big project like this, if it's done by a Department of Transportation, you have a team of staff that helps with the oversight and program management of a project. We don't have that yet with the port, and so this is an idea that we've been talking about, which is to bring that assistance team on to help the port, or eventually the bridge authority, manage the project to its eventual completion. There's a variety of design options. You've talked about public-private partnership in a past workshop. Design bid build is that traditional approach you have been through before. Design build is where you basically take it to a design to this DAP or 30% stage, and then you bring on a combined contractor and design team to design it and build it, and sometimes at the same time. That's why it's called design build. Another is construction manager general contractor, where you bring a contractor in early in the design process to give you that constructability oversight and review. And then when it's turned over to the contractor, they do their own construction management with the owner or owner's representative providing oversight of how that goes to make sure things are getting done as they're supposed to. So our current schedule for this procurement, and this is still a little bit of state of flux. A lot of it depends on when all of the build grant documentation and authorizations get settled. We're still looking at a draft RFP for whoever wants to review it, late spring. There's an early draft that Kevin's had for a little bit now, and we've been talking through it. We do want to eventually advertise this sometime in the summer. July and August is the current time frame, with selection sometime either September or October. The Port Commission right now would be the group that approves the contract with this design team. And we intend to start their work in November, by the end of the year. Depending on the level of detail and how much is in their scope of work and deliverables, we're looking at an 8 to 12 month process to get their work to this DAP or 30% jump off stage. As I mentioned, the build authorization grant process, or build grant authorization process, was taking a little bit more time than we originally had thought in this schedule. So this may need to move back because this work will be funded by that build grant.
Mike, do you want questions, or Chuck, do you want questions now or at the end?
I'm okay taking questions as we go through. So I'll go back to this.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm fully clear on what you're saying. You're saying it's 8 to 12 months to DAP, but I thought your definition of DAP was 30% PS&E. Am I correlating those correctly or missing something?
Now, DAP is what we call 30% of final design. So it's the proof of concept, but a 30% of the 100% final design. The reason we're saying 8 to 12 months is when we start talking about what's included in this effort, there's a variety of design studies, design options that have not yet been settled, such as what does the bicycle pedestrian facility look like? What are the aesthetics of the bridge and how they mesh with the Columbia River Gorge? The fishery site on the north side. There's a lot of these that are still topics, but they have not yet been settled as far as what is it that gets designed. And each one of those has its own process. And so we're saying 8 to 12 months. That endpoint then would be a decision or a product, which is a design definition that allows you to either go out for a design build procurement because you've given the contractor and designer enough definition of the project that they know what it is that they're proposing on. You get a good cost estimate. You know, right now we have a cost estimate that's based on the 5% or so level design that we have so far, which has a bunch of contingencies built into that and assumptions. But when you get to 30%, you're able to provide a lot more detail that gives you a better cost estimate and something that you can use at that point for programming of funding or developing a very detailed financing plan.
Yeah, Chuck, let me interrupt. I'm well aware of that. I've been working on this project for years now. What I'm trying to just identify is a correlation between time, product level, percentage completion, and money. So if you go back to your prior slide from this
All right. This one?
15%, okay, preliminary engineering. And then design acceptance package is 30%. Are we saying that with the build grant that we have, that is sufficient funding to get to 30% design and DAP? Because I thought 30% design required somewhere in that magnitude of $15 to $18 million. And either way, is the 15% design, preliminary design, is that a milestone that's built in, at least conceptually built into the AE consultants scope?
Yeah, we first had this as a first decision point milestone. When we took a look at what's needed to get to this DAP stage, that's the real critical milestone. There's enough design of the bridge itself, the design of the approaches, the mitigations, that it gives you enough definition that if somebody wants to propose on a design build, or if you decide to go P3, you've got enough definition in there that gives some certainty to these interested teams to be able to make a competitive proposal to do it.
Right. So is the 30% design, is it reasonable to do that within the build grant authorization of $5 million less administrative costs, traffic and revenue studies, and various other tasks?
Yes, we believe that when we did an independent estimate to get to DAP, we believe there's enough money in the build grant to do this and those other studies, plus the administrative costs that you just mentioned.
All right, great, thank you.
So Chuck, I have a question. When you say it's enough money to get to DAP, to me, that means you can get through the 15%, you're ready for DAP. Do you actually mean it's enough money to get us through DAP and to the end of the 30% design?
Yes, because
Okay.
that's a
Okay.
key decision point.
Okay, great, thank you.
Chuck, one comment. Kristen Stallman, I believe, just joined us. Kristen is the contract administrator for Region 1, ODOT Region 1. And she just sent a chat item about certified proposers. So can you talk a little bit about how this schedule might change if Federal Highways requires ODOT to conduct the RFPs, since I doubt that there's any municipality in the gorge that is a certified proposer.
Certified local government, yeah.
So I guess want to differentiate between procuring a design consultant for what we call 30% design, or and you'll find out we actually are proposing a series of exit ramps during this entire contract that depends on where you want to go beyond the 30%. There's a certified bid agency. Is that what the reference is?
Right.
Because any federal funding that comes into the state of Oregon, in order to bid the project out for construction, ODOT requires that agency have a certification, or what we call certification acceptance in other areas, to be able to do the bidding themselves. If they don't, ODOT does the bid, or a partner agency who has that certification acceptance needs to do that. This project is a really big project, and so if we get to that point where you're looking at a design build or some type of alternative delivery procurement, there will need to be that discussion as to who has that certification approval to be able to carry to that more detailed step, including anything with CMGC or anything that has a construction component to it. Does that make sense?
No, well, this is a little different. This is a
Okay.
local government. So even to do the engineering, the A&E consultant procurement, you would need to work with the ODOT's local agency liaison
Right.
program if the port is not a certified local government, which I don't believe you are. So that may be something we just need to work on.
Yeah, we'll need to work through that because the port did the EIS procurement. Now this is a different stage in the process. So yes, the port will need to work with the local programs unit, be able to go through this process and identify how this gets procured.
Yeah, and that was done through state funds.
Yeah.
So with the federalization of the funds,
right,
it complicates this next step. So
that's the front part where we have that draft RFP for review that builds in that local programs oversight, and that's where we talk about who's actually going to run the show when we get to that stage. Does that answer your question, Kristen?
Yeah, just to be sure that that stage is this A&E procurement. That's this next stage.
Yes.
Okay.
So I know we've talked about this in the past. There are geotechnical borings that have been discussed for the last several months to provide some more detail about what's underwater and where the bridge footings and foundations are going to, or like at this point does plan to go, to get some more information about what would happen once you start getting underwater and going into the geological strata under the river. Up until the last couple of months, this was going to be a full amendment for the WSP contract under the EIS to be able to do the borings, have the the data, the boring's actually done, lab tested, and then a data report issued, and then foundation recommendations provided by that consultant, and then their work is done. We would then have that be an addendum to the RFP, so that other consultants could be able to propose on this and they'd all have the same information. With the length of time and with this certification step that we've been talking about, the question is, should we, how far do we take the geotechnical borings and data collection as part of WSP's work? Because it may or may not be necessary to complete the EIS, but it definitely is necessary to begin the this next level of design. And so at this point, we are putting on the table to actually do the borings and data collection now to keep the schedule going, but move the design, the foundation recommendations to this A&E consultant contract. And what that does is it allows that design consultant to basically pick up the work that's been done to date, including the geotechnical data, and then be able to incorporate that into their what eventually becomes their DAP level design. And so you have one consultant doing all of that design work. The other thing we're looking at in trying to split this into two is from beginning to end of this geotechnical work, that's an 8 to 9 month timeline, and we have not begun it yet. And so what we wanted to do is to try to get as much of that done now, keep on schedule, move the design part of that, which is part of that 8 to 9 months, to the A&E time, so they can incorporate that into that 8 to 12 month schedule that they would have once they get hired. And I jumped ahead of myself here. So here's the options that we have been talking about. Again, it's whether we just have WSP do the whole thing as an add-on to their EIS scope of work, which would be a contract amendment. Do we move the whole thing to the A&E consultant, or do we do the split as I mentioned before? The first option, either the first options have a longer timeline from when we start now to when this work is complete before we'd even be able to issue the RFP, compared to if we do the data part now and then do the design part later as part of the E&E timeline. That has the most, the least impact on the schedule, the overall schedule, and that's our current recommendation, is to do that split. So as I mentioned, the way that we're packaging the procurement, the other thing to look at under any type of A&E engineering type procurement regulations, when you procure or hire a design team through an RFP process, we need to make sure that we've put in the intended scope or anticipated scope for the whole duration of their work, so that we're not hiring them for a small design and then do a contract amendment later on to do the rest of the design. That actually is not consistent with procurement regulations. So we are putting in this RFP the ability to hire them through the entire design process, that design bid builds, to take it to final construction documents, or incorporate exit ramps so that if we decide at the 30%, or if you decide at 30% that we want to go design build and go procure a separate team, you have that ability to do that. Those are called exit ramps. That's being built into this, this scope. It does include what you would consider to be all of your design elements for a big bridge project like this. It does include designing the mitigation projects. You'll find when we have the EIS finalized and the record of decision put out, there will be some mitigation items. There'll be both projects and programs that come out as mitigation items. And there will be cost estimates. We're proposing at this point cost estimates at the 15% and 30% stages. That's to align with these funding requests that might be happening over the next several months. There also will be a cost estimate produced at the 60 and 100% stage. The 100% is an important estimate because that's the engineer estimate that gets compared to bids. And it's compared to bids in a variety of ways, with the part, regardless of the project delivery mechanism that eventually gets selected. We still have to have that cost analysis to indicate that this is a reasonable cost bid for the project. I mentioned earlier that there are some special studies. There's the bridge aesthetics with the Columbia Gorge Commission and other stakeholders who have a role in that. The Columbia River tribes are very interested in the fishing sites, especially on the north side of the bridge. And then there are other studies that I think Michael mentioned as well, the traffic tolling and revenue, the P3 and what I call the project delivery study, and several others that will likely be needed over the next several months before we finally get to how we're going to deliver the project. This consultant will be providing that technical input. And so if there are design related questions or analysis related questions that come up in these other studies, this consultant is there to answer those questions. And as Michael asked before, the build grant should be sufficient to get us to that DAP, which is that key jump off point decision as to where we go from there with the project delivery. So depending on the project delivery options, and this is why we're recommending the DAP is a good point. If you take it to DAP, you can hand it off to that design build team. I also want to note that kind of getting a little bit into the weeds with engineering procurement, but you want to make sure that that everybody has a level playing field when they're competing for design work on the project. So if you have a design team that's hired to take this to a DAP stage, and you decide at some point that it's going to become a design build, so the design builder would then take it to advanced design and then eventually build the project. We're framing this so that there is a firewall built in, so that we're not we don't have a consultant or a design team that has more information than other competing design teams. So we want to make sure that the playing field is level compared to everybody who's competing for this project. It also goes with the P3, the public-private partnership, and how that design overlays with however that P3 works out. CMGC is a little different in the sense of how you bring in and how early you bring in that contractor. In some instances, we've seen the contractor bring in their own design team. Our experience tends to be more on the bridge side, that you maintain that same design team, but you have the contractor there with them to give that design review or that construction review constructability oversight at some point between 30 and 60% is a good time to do something like that. Obviously with design bid build, you have the same designer take it all the way through until you've got your bid documents, and then they would stay on afterward for any contractor requests for information or questions on the design when they start building it. There was a question as if you have DAP and then you have an exit, so you have one consultant taking it to 30%, and then somebody else is taking it to final design, is that an issue? It's actually pretty common in our industry that you have that one consultant might take it to the proof of concept or preliminary design or DAP level design. It then gets re-procured for advanced and final design. I'm working on several projects now where another consultant took it to that 30% stage. It then got procured for final design. We won it as a different team and are currently working on taking those projects to develop construction documents that will then be procured as a construction bid. Any questions before I move on from project delivery options? So this is the evaluation process that, you know, regardless if it's, you know, who takes it through this procurement process, these are kind of typical steps. This is how we've laid it out for this specific procurement. The advertisement goes to all interested consultants. There's a variety of ways you can advertise. You want to make sure that all consultants who are interested in this have an equal opportunity to propose on it. For the project this big and this complex, we do recommend a pre-proposal meeting. So you get consultants who are interested to come to a meeting and ask questions about it. Make sure they have their clarifications that they need. If there's questions that can't be answered in that meeting, there's a way to get them answers after that meeting. And it can be either mandatory and non-mandatory. I've seen it both ways. We'd like to give consultants 6 weeks to prepare a proposal after the RFP is advertised. That should be plenty of time for a consultant team to put their proposal together. There's a shortlist process. You know, if you get 4 or 5 or 6 teams interested, you want to probably are going to find it very difficult to choose between them at that point, where that's where interviews come in handy. You need shortlist to maybe half the size of that list. 3 or 4 teams is what we're anticipating in this process. We have interview panel, the evaluation committee, as we call it. They make a recommendation then to the port for contract negotiations. That is just to negotiate a contract amount and a final scope that then is taken action on by the Port Commission. And we like to do that before the action on the consultant award, so we know what the dollar amount is. And it could be that, and there are some instances I've seen and experienced where you can't come to terms in that negotiation, and under most state procurement, including Oregon, if you can't reach a negotiated amount with that top ranked team, you need to go to the second one, but you can't go back to the first. And so that happens before the Port Commission takes action on that award. We find that usually there's a month or 2 between where you make the award and then get the actual notice to proceed. That's to get your contract documentation in order. And this is actually a similar process that we used for that EIS procurement that resulted in our WSP being hired for the project. So the selection or evaluation committee, last time we had 5 members. They were all appointed staff. And this time we're suggesting these as questions. Love to hear your input on it. The build grant does note that the evaluation committee will be chaired by Klickitat County as part of that grant. And the questions are, do we want to have 5 like we did before? You'd like to have an odd number so you can break ties if needed. There's a variety of ways you can choose that consultant and how you get to that choice. Looking at the agencies before Port of Hood River, Port of Klickitat, ODOT and WashDOT, City of Hood River. We know we need Klickitat County at the table this time. What other agencies should be represented, and should we have an elected official on the committee? this time. And I've been involved with evaluation and selection committees where elected officials were part of the process. And it's one way to become vested in the consultant's work that comes up. I'm going to stop at this point, see if there's any questions or any discussion on this makeup of the committee.
Chuck, what's the time commitment? Like, what's the size of a typical proposal? And maybe just touch on the time commitment.
Yeah, good question. For the EIS, we had a page limit of 25 pages. And they could, I think we did allow them to put in some key personnel resumes on top of that, but 25 is usually what we ask for them to talk about their approach, their qualifications, project experience, provide their references, and give a good description or bios of each of the key personnel they're proposing to use. The more pages, obviously, the longer it's going to take to review it. And a bigger contract does not necessarily mean you have to have more pages. So if this is a $5 million contract, which actually, this contract amount is likely going to be similar to what the WSP contract amount is, I think 25 pages is probably a pretty good size to get that. If you get 4 or 5 or 6 proposals, expect maybe anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours per proposal to go through it, depending how detailed you want to go through it. Probably a couple hours in a meeting to go through and shortlist. And then if you have 3 or 4 consultants to interview, that's probably a half day to 3/4 of a day to do the interviews and deliberate over who would be the top ranked consultant. So that's usually spread out over a couple of months. So it's not like it happens all in the same week.
I've
I
got
have a
it.
question. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Kate.
Oh, either way. That's quite a large time commitment for myself. But worse than that is I've never evaluated this kind of a thing before. So I really don't feel like I have specific expertise in evaluating it to begin with. Maybe there's someone on our staff that would, but I don't particularly feel like I have the expertise for that. So, I just want to say that up front, and then we can talk about it more.
So that kind of segues into my question. Would it be appropriate for the committee to include members of the public that have resumes that complement this type of a evaluation? Engineers, people that would want to donate their time if they are qualified in this area, or does it need to only be elected and officials and staff?
Well, I'll kind of couch this in a couple ways. I've actually had a couple of citizens on previous selection committees that I've been involved with or projects I've managed. The understanding is that this is a pretty important contract, and to be able to hire a consultant to do this type of design, we need to make sure they have the appropriate qualifications to do that. In those cases, we did have kind of a pre-qualification review before it went to the selection committee. The selection committee is more of being able to, or do you believe this consultant's the best one for this work? If you have somebody who is an engineer who's done that pre-qualification, they can give their understanding of or answer questions that they might have about any concerns over the qualifications. That's why you typically like to have engineering or public works staff involved with evaluating consultants like this, just because they understand the qualifications that need to go into it. As far as the resume of a public person involved, I think it would need to be with the understanding, for one, I think there's a benefit in doing that, at least for one position on the evaluation committee, because likely that person would be a project champion or would have a good level of engineering in their past work life to bring that expertise to the table. The downside, I guess, or maybe a concern would be they're representing this agency on that selection committee, whoever, whichever stakeholder group they belong to. The eventual contract's going to be with the Port of Hood River. And so it's one that will probably need to have a little bit more discussion. I can't give you a solid recommendation as to whether or not I think you should do it, but I think you should at least consider that as an option, talk about the pros and cons.
So to understand the process a little bit, this committee would only be making a recommendation to the port, who would then, is that correct? Who would then engage in the contract? Yes.
The recommendation would be to Michael McElway, and the negotiations would be with him and Kevin, because the contracting is going to be done by the port. This is only a recommendation. And in fact, technically, this is a recommendation of the consultant rankings to be able then for the port to negotiate the contract. And so that's why this is more of a recommendation committee or an evaluation committee. We tend, I know I used the term selection committee on this slide. I should slap myself because we've, over the years, we've tried to get away from using selection committee. They're not actually selecting, they're ranking.
So to better understand, is this group being asked to come up with that committee, or are we being asked to provide the Port of Hood or the Port Commission with how to set up that committee?
I think today we're asking for input on what you'd like to see on that committee. Eventually, it's going to be up to the port and working with ODOT, because they'll have to work with the ODOT local programs unit, get this advertised and procured through their process. So I think what we're looking for today is, what are your thoughts? What this should look like, so we can take that back to the port and to ODOT and make that determination.
Well, from my perspective, I would like to see people on the committee who have built bridges before. That would be the number one ranking for who I would like to put on the committee. Okay. That's just me, but I would be of very little help other than to kind of give my opinion. But I have no experience, as Mayor McBride said, at all going through this very complex process. And so that's kind of my recommendation. Experts in this.
All right, thank you.
I agree. I mean, we see here, the 5 members, and then, of the NEPA, and then, should it be the same people again? And we have, Klickitat County's already on there because that's where the money is. So that I see how that would make sense. That's where the money's sitting. But then as many experts on that committee as possible, it seems like would be prudent for this part. We're getting pretty technical here.
Hi, this is Kevin. Just a couple of comments. One, the Klickitat County commitment to chair the evaluation committee was a component of the build application. It was a joint application with the port agreeing to contribute over $1 million to leverage the grant. And Klickitat County did not was not in a position to contribute money, but their contribution was to chair these evaluation or selection committees. There's also a technical advisory committee that once the project starts off, and a lot of these larger projects have technical advisory committees made up of local boots on the ground folks that can provide input to the design team. So that's the reason for Klickitat County's involvement. The other thing too, I would say, is that if the RFP has clearly written criteria, it shouldn't always be terribly technical. I know that sounds like an oversimplification, and I certainly wouldn't disagree with anything that's been said as far as who should serve on the committee. But I think that that if there was interest, the criteria should be able to help in being able to score. But that being said, it is a large time commitment.
So Kevin, are you saying that maybe we need to get these, you know, like Bob said, someone who's built bridges before or done large scale construction projects involved in the wording and the writing of the RFP before this evaluation committee happens?
Well, I think the first group, I think ODOT, obviously after hearing from Kristen, you know, we're going to want to make sure that ODOT reviews the RFP documents. So I think that's going to be critical. But I think that with our consultant teams, and if there's other people that are interested in seeing it, we can certainly meet with them to get feedback as well. We certainly want to make it a transparent process, Commissioner. So absolutely, I think if once this becomes a public document for review, we can certainly meet with individuals to get their feedback.
Yeah, so I guess if I raise that confusion, we aren't asking you to help us write the RFP. I think that effort, we want to make sure, and let's say my company's done a number of bridges. I've led a number of big projects and actually written RFPs myself for those big projects. And so I think the technical aspects of those, and including qualifications, are something that I think we're okay handling. There's some elements of the scope, the special studies, and the makeup of this committee is really what we're looking for your feedback to bring this out. I do want to mention that it doesn't necessarily need to be a prerequisite that you have built big bridges to be on an evaluation committee like this. Keep in mind, this is a project that will be out in the public eye. There'll be a consultant that will be working with stakeholders and public groups. And so there will be need to be a comfort level that this consultant will be able to work with the Gorge Commission or work with you as the different partner agencies on this project. And so that is a benefit to having well, I'll call a non-engineer. I'm an engineer, so I guess I can go after myself. But there is some benefit as to having somebody who's not a detailed bridge engineer on the evaluation committee to give that comfort level check during the process, especially in the interview.
I'm just going to say that I'm going to have a hard time committing that amount of time right now, well, in the next few months, because our city manager is leaving and I'm on the selection committee for, working on getting a new city manager. And that's going to be very time consuming, lots of interviews and things to read for that. So I can see if there's someone else from our staff potentially that could do that, or possibly an alternate person that's not on that committee for the city to step in. But I don't think I'm going to have time to do that this spring.
I certainly appreciate that. For the sake of the discussion, why don't I talk to you offline and put together get some ideas. And then for the next meeting, maybe offer up some positions for consideration for the evaluation committee as a starting point.
I do see another hand raised.
Yeah, this is Jacob Anderson, Clickdat County Commissioner. My personal feeling is we're going to have it being chaired by Gordy, who is a PE for the county. He's done, these evaluations of contractors many times. So my personal feeling would be is if we have the Clickdat County Public Works Director, who's an engineer, and if the Hood River County Public Works Director would want a seat, that would make sense because that's what they do. They evaluate these regularly, as well as ODOT, WashDOT. That would be great. And then if there's one elected from Washington and one elected from Oregon, I think that would make a fine committee to make a priority ranking that's going to go to the Port Commission.
Thank you. Any other input or questions before I move on? I think we're kind of getting out of my time, so I wanted to.
No, I'll just say, yeah, to wrap up, that sounds, I think that proposal is probably fine after hearing you, Chuck, describe the committee as much less than I anticipated they need to have with respect to experience, and more of a, toss it around, make sure that whatever recommendation you have is a good one. I think that's fine. But yeah, no, I guess I just had misunderstood what the committee was, what their responsibilities were supposed to be.
Okay, thank you. So I do want to talk a little bit about the criteria that we're floating out there. With a big project like this, we want to make sure that the teams that are proposing, the team that gets selected has experience with big projects. This happens to be a big project over a waterway of the US and going between 2 states and multiple jurisdictions. So really somebody that's not a huge base to call on for experience like that. And you want to make sure that you have that that competent and experienced team. So you really want to hire the best and the most experienced in this type of environment. And so there's going to be a high reliance on that team experience in relevant situations like this. Typically, what I like to throw in, and we did this with the EIS and we're proposing it again with the A&E contract, is to look at not only their approach to this, but the quality of their proposal. And I can tell you, there are engineers who write very well. They could be novelists. There's engineers who not quite sure why they're even writing because I can't even understand what it is they're trying to say. That actually is a big deal when it comes to design studies, making recommendations, and conversing with the community, as well as other aspects of their work. Quality control is another item. We want to make sure that they have the best quality control practices underway because this is again, it's a big complex project. And to make sure you get the best quality product, you want to make sure they have the best quality control practices in place. And then typically interview scores are separately scored. Depending on how we want to frame this, can either be added to the score from the proposal, or you could say that the teams that are shortlisted are all back to the same level playing field and then use the interview to make that selection. Or the ranking, I guess. I need to get away from that term. So what happens next? This is just kind of the overall timeline of what I showed earlier. Right now, we say keep going, make sure we get that record of decision in place later this year. We're deciding how we want to frame the geotechnical borings, and we're recommending that we kind of split the data and the actual report recommendations into separate components. The work with ODOT. We'd like to get WashDOT and FHWA involved in the RFP review and the procurement process. Eventually, we'll advertise the request for proposals in a variety of settings, make sure all the consultants who are interested have the ability to know when this is out on the street. And we just had that discussion about the evaluation committee and selection process. And then hopefully by the end of this year, we'll initiate that work. That actually ends my presentation part. So I guess I'll just see if there's any further questions before I turn it back to Kevin.
Yeah, this is Jake Anderson as well. My personal opinion is to go with your recommendation on splitting up that scope of work so that we can keep moving forward and stay on track and timeline.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. We'll keep you posted. And I believe that the Port of Hood River Commission will definitely be looking to the bi-state working group for support on the RFP. So after Chuck prepares the RFP, I'll bring the final draft back to this group and give you more than 2 days to review it. And at that point, then we'll take that to the Port Commission for recommended approval. So we'll keep you posted. All right, well, the next item on the agenda was a P3 discussion. This is something that we wanted to keep on the agenda so we don't lose track of that. I do know Commissioner Anderson and I had a brief conversation. And so I know that there was some concern from Senator King about the P3 approach. And so Commissioner, I don't know if, not to put you on the spot or anything, but I don't know if you're ready to maybe address some of those comments.
Yeah, after Senator King was on our last meeting, Mayor Keithler and Mayor Barnes and I had a Zoom conference to see exactly where they felt that at the Washington State Legislature about P3s. I'd heard in the past that the legislature wasn't in favor of P3s, specifically the chairman. And that was kind of what Senator King had stated. He said, you know, it's going to take legislation if you want to do a bridge authority. We think we can get through that, but trying to get the authorization for a P3 as well is going to be much more challenging. And asked, where do you want to spend, you know, your time and effort trying to lobby for it? I guess it's had a negative connotation on the west side of the state for quite some time. And I'll ask Mayor Keithler and Mayor Barnes if that's exactly how they remember it as well.
Yeah, Senator King made it very clear that one of the past transportation people that is not even in the legislation anymore, that he had very negative and views on P3s and wouldn't even bring the subject up, and that that has stuck in that legislature ever since. And nobody really in the Washington legislation is for P3s.
Marla, did you have anything to add to that?
Not so much to add, I guess more just to reiterate. I mean, I think that it was good for us to hear that feedback from Senator King, because I think it informs a bit more maybe where we emphasize our efforts right now. I mean, certainly my takeaway was in line with what you've already heard, and just the sense that if we really decide ultimately that P3 is the way to go, that there will certainly be a lift, most likely on the Washington side, to really change some ingrained perceptions about those types of projects. And so just trying to weigh and be strategic about how that may or may not move P3 as an opportunity up or down the ladder.
So I've got a question. So they have a negative connotation about P3s. So was he actually insinuating that if we went that way, he wouldn't, or they, whoever, wouldn't work on the Washington side to help fill a small bucket of money that might be matched by Oregon if we went P3 route? I mean, he just wouldn't work towards funding of any sort. Is that?
That wasn't my takeaway. I mean, my sense was more he was trying to, we certainly approached the conversation wanting to acknowledge and, you know, follow up with gratitude about how much he has been moving this issue forward and make it clear that we stand together with him and are trying to figure out the best ways for all of us to jointly move it forward. So the way that I interpreted the feedback was almost that off the cuff heads up of, hey guys, this could be the route we go, but just so you know, there's going to be a bigger lift here than just some of the legal or legislative aspects of introducing this as an option. There will be opinions and mindset that need to change as well. That's how I heard it, less that it was him saying, I won't even entertain that. He was just sort of saying, if that's where we're going to stick our necks out, it could be a little bit of a lift.
And I think the big thing that he was making the point of is that he and the chairman of the Transportation Senate Committee are working really diligently and hard to create an infrastructure package, much like we're seeing that's getting pushed at the federal level. And that he stated that this project is his #1 priority for him moving forward with that infrastructure package. And he really wouldn't want to see that project, that $100 million or so, due to a negative perception by colleagues, lose the $100 million.
Yeah, I would say the positive takeaway that I had from our conversation was from his perspective, and I think it's what we've been trying to grapple with is like, how realistic is this? And the feedback we were hearing from him is like, hey guys, this seems doable. If we can, you know, move 100 million from Washington, 100 million from Oregon, 100 million through some federal routes does not seem too hard to capture. So I think that gave us the impression of like, okay, you know, and this is back to, I think, one of those critical questions of that even the consultants we've listened to have said, the question of whether or not P3 makes sense should not be rooted in, is this the only way or our answer to financing? And so hearing that from him, I think, energized a bit of like, okay, this, you know, let's just make sure as we're going through this that we're not missing an opportunity if there is one. And if we are pursuing P3, I heard him more as just a heads up of this might be an area where it's going to be a bit more of a lift than you think at this stage to get the right things done on the Washington side.
Yes,
So-
and I would comment as well as everyone is that he truly felt that between Oregon, Washington, and the federal government funds that we can get enough to fund the replacement of this bridge without doing a P3.
That would be great if it's reality. I'm just so skeptical, still skeptical, because we've been, you know, we've talked about this so long and nothing, you know, we've gotten little bits, and 5 million's not nothing for sure. We've got several, you know, 5 million here, 5 million there, but then you talk about 300 to 400 million. That's just not very much compared to the full amount that's needed. So, you know, I'm kind of wondering is he, you know, probably didn't get into these specifics, but how much further can we go along the route of investigation of P3 without having a problem, you know, to just keep the P3 going down a road in parallel with this other way that we're going, and not ruffle any feathers or say we're going that way for sure, but we're still investigating. I don't know how far we can go.
Well, I think to go down that same road, I mean, my concern is that we get 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, and then we don't have the funding. And then we get to start working on convincing the Washington legislature that maybe P3 is something we should do. And so I just am not, I'm the same way. I'm skeptical. It seems like the Washington folks have a lot more confidence in their legislature than I do in the Oregon legislature to come up with $100 million. But, I could be okay with continuing down this asking the government for money road. I think this is probably the best opportunity we're going to have in our lifetime, given the funding, the infrastructure projects available. But I'd like to see some sort of a plan or deadline where we pull the ripcord and say, all right, let's go a different route. And I think we've got to kind of narrow that down, because this open-ended forever asking the government for money thing, I don't think, we can't do it forever. Eventually the bridge is going to fall apart.
One thing I would note, and it was addressed in the presentation that Chuck Green gave, is that 30% design, that DAP point is really a project delivery decision point. And so I would say that as we go up to that 30%, I mean, that there will be a study done at that point that will take into account all of the project delivery methods. So I mean, and obviously we're spending a lot of effort right now preparing grant requests and lobbying and asking for your support and letters as this money comes forth. And so, and I'm going to be producing that funding summary for Mayor McBride, so everybody has a good feel of when the next steps are going to be happening, because they're coming at us fast.
And I could, at the end of this DAP period, we're talking 8, 9, up to 9 months to a year, and you're saying we will have a decision point then. And if we don't have, feels like if we don't have anything solid, then we've got to start talking other directions, because how long it takes to do all these things. And, we've got 4.5 or 5 years left at the most. So, to just not really have anything whatsoever in a year doesn't feel comfortable for me. Like Bob said, we need a deadline. And when we get to the end of the 30%, we're going to have to decide anyway. We're going to have to make some decisions at that point. So I think we should just, if we could just agree that we know we're going to have to do that then, and that might be the time that we have to really know if we're going to get any money or not. And not just, well, we hope it'll be in another year. We hope it'll be in another year. I'm just skeptical.
I would say, from our last meeting to this meeting, I mean, in our last meeting, talking about getting $250 million from the feds ask was not even on our radar. And now it is. And things are moving really fast right now out of the Biden administration. And, I think that if Washington really wants to push forward in grabbing these Build Back Better funds, if it happens, I think we're going to know pretty quickly what's going to happen with that. But I do agree that we should probably say, let's work on this and put all of our eggs in this basket. But then agree that there needs to be a time when we say, we got to pull the plug.
I agree. I mean, my sense is, between now and I think July, August is kind of the chatter about when this package and a lot of the plans will be finalized, that we should have a pretty good sense of whether these efforts are paying off or not. And then I think it sounds like we're all in agreement that if it's not looking like it is, then we need to be responsive and feel comfortable shifting course. And I think we can. And, I don't think it's not necessarily saying that P3s can't happen. I think, to me, the takeaway from Senator King was it was very informative of, okay, if we reach that point, a fork in the road, and the decision is that this is the best way forward. And so what that means is we've really got to push to make sure the new bi-state authority structure allows for P3 to be a consideration in Washington, just adding the asterisk in on that project calendar that like this will require more resources, more lift, potentially more strategy to make sure that we can make that happen.
And it, you know, it kind of seems like if Senator King and, you know, if the money for the Build Back Better doesn't happen, and we can say, we wanted to go that route, we didn't want to go P3, we tried to go this other direction, and obviously it's not happening. You know, we really need this added in to be able to do it this way because we didn't get the funds. So, you know, there's a logical, it should be logical for them too, that we have to go forward with something different.
Kevin, can you remind me where we're at on the, it seems like last meeting we shelved the Bridge Authority in Oregon, the continuation of that. Is that still shelved, or are we still working on that?
I wouldn't quite frame it as a shelving. I think that there were some other issues that legislators felt would complicate other discussions going on in Salem. There is support. I mean, Representative Williams is very supportive of the bridge compact. And our plan is to start working with legislative staff after this current legislative session is over. So we have not heard anything from either side that coming in with bi-state legislation for the 22 session is going to be a problem. It was just the fact that we had a $5 million request coming to Oregon, plus the Bridge Authority study language, was complicating the messaging a little bit. And so there was a request to, let's focus on the $5 million. We're supported in the 22 session of the region's effort. And Representative Williams really understands the politics of that and how important it is to the region.
I mean, I'd also, and I understand for people that have been involved in this process longer, like Kate and others, you know, there has been a lot of talk and then just a lot of going in circles and whatnot, but we also have to look at, now we've received $5 million for the EIS, we've received $5 million on the build, we're getting another $5 million probably from Washington. I don't think that either state or Fed is going to want to see a project fail that they've already invested in. And so if we can keep just pushing the needle forward, at some point, both states understand that a big ask is going to happen.
Hey, Kevin, with what we found out today in terms of the 5 million, and it's going to get us through DAP, but we've got all these other potential $5 million pots sitting here. Can we use any of that money? Because what we were going to ask the legislature for is the money to do the study on the Bridge Authority. Can we just use that money and do the study ourselves? And then we can go to the legislature and say, we've done the study and we think the Bridge Authority is the right way to go, or we think a bridge compact's the right way to go. And it shouldn't take $5 million to study that.
Yeah, no, and that was one of the contracts that we had with Steve Siegel, was that his role, what he's been working on is looking at the different laws in Oregon and Washington. And so he met with Brad Boswell, who's our lobbyist in Olympia, and met with the Joint Transportation Committee, which is a bunch of staffers. And we talked about the Bridge Authority. So we're going to be doing the same after this session in Oregon. And Steve's role is to kind of bring up issues that need to be reconciled between the two states, because the staffers in Olympia aren't always talking to the staffers in Oregon on a daily basis. So Steve is kind of taking the ripples out of those discussions and hoping that we can have something that meets in the middle. So part of the expenses as well is not just the studying of the legislation, but it's actually propping up what this bridge authority will look like. So there will be a time in the not too distant future, next 2 or 3 years, where there will be a new government, and there's going to be an expectation that this is has its own bylaws, has its own rules, that it's up and operating. There's going to be a considerable expense in getting that up and running. So that is a component. If you want to look at a tranche of $25 million for combined phase 2 and 3, it includes those types of costs. And I do need to ask you, have you all seen Siegel's full programmed preliminary cost estimate? That was Steve's full estimation for the 330 to 400 million for the project. That includes all programming aside from engineering and construction. I thought I sent that out, but maybe I need to resend it.
That would be great. Thank you.
So the point being is that there's a lot of other things that need to happen that we don't have enough money with the $5 million build grant. I mean, we're going to be able to get to DAP, but we're not going to be able to do the deep dive traffic and revenue studies. There's going to be, they're starting the permitting process for the Army Corps 404 and 408 processes. There's going to be a lot of other costs that are going to need to be funded, but right now we're focused on engineering and as part of this build. I mean, that's the biggest priority in my mind, is getting engineering and advocating for money.
Mhm.
And I can, for the next meeting, I can, I'll show you a budget on how on what's actually going to get paid for with each subsequent tranche of funding. Well, good. Well, that was a good discussion. I appreciate that. It's good that's very, very helpful for us, where we try to focus where we're wanting to go to move this project forward. It's 3 o'clock. Even without Steve's presentation, we've only saved 10 minutes. So that brings us to the membership discussion. And thank you, Commissioner Babbitts, for updating your information on that chart. But one of the things I wanted to bring back for your consideration or feedback is, as I noted, we've had some really good conversations with the Yakima tribe. I think they're very happy at the timing that they're coming in. They were worried, oh, does this happen in next year? And it's like, no, it's not happening next year. So they're really feeling like they're in early at the right time for this process. And so part of the question is does it make sense to open up the working group, and to what degree? I think that the tribes especially have an interesting role in the gorge. And so just kind of wanted to open that up to the working group for some discussion. Primarily for a feedback loop, so that they're in the loop, they're getting the same information that you are. They can take it back to their agencies and come back to the working group and be able to share their thoughts as well.
I'd be happy to kick that off. I think, as everyone knows, I'm a big fan of communication, so I believe in more and not less. And I think that having tribal representation in this group in some sort of capacity benefits everybody. It makes our group look inclusive for looking at different pots of money, especially federal dollars. And it helps, I just think it just helps show that we're really focused on our relationships in the gorge. And I think that by brainstorming with the tribes more on a regular basis, I think that we can do things to really support one another, like, help them with their fish processing plant, or, get their direct input on what they would like to see for themselves. And it just makes everyone look really good. So I'm all for it.
I agree with Christy for basically all the same reasons. I think it's, there's a direct person that can go back to the tribes and say, I was at the meetings. This is what they said. It's nothing secondhand. It's all firsthand. I think that the input that we would get from someone that would sit on the committee might not be the same input that we would get when they go back and talk to their tribal leaders. They may have to go back and then come back at a second meeting and, they can't, give us the full yes, no, oh, that's going to work great, or that's not going to work, till they have consultation with their tribal leaders, at least from things that I've worked with them on through my work as a land trust manager. So, I think that process might be a little bit slow, but I think for all the reasons Christy mentioned, I think it would be great to have them on the committee.
Any other organizations, since we're talking about it? I mean, it's been nice having a pretty lean group. So open it up to other consideration as well.
I guess I would first couch the question is, are they voting members of the group? Because we have the voting members of the group, and WashDOT shows up to the meeting. ODOT shows up to the meeting. And it's always good to have the information spreading, but don't we have our agreement that we all signed that said who is a member and what's the membership look like? And so having them show up and take that information back. But the question I would have is does that mean they're a voting member, or are they just there for consultation and understanding?
I think that's totally open for discussion. I would say that the MOU, that it's a consensus-based organization, and the MOU really talks about not so much voting, but building consensus. And so there isn't voting per se called out in the MOU at this point. But the 6 members and the 6 alternates are definitely called out as being the main group. And obviously we invite the DOTs for just to keep them in the loop. For this meeting was a great example of that, with ODOT reminding us about the certifications, for example. But totally open to your input. I mean, they can be ancillary members, or I don't know the name right offhand, or they can just be an equal member. It's really up to you guys.
And then are we inviting one tribe? Are we inviting CrickFit? Who are we inviting would be my next question.
Well, that's a complicated question too. We originally did reach out for CritFic at the very beginning of the NEPA process, and they were very reluctant to make any statement on behalf of the 4 individual tribes. And so they pretty much kicked that to individual tribal discussions. In my conversation with the Yakima, and keeping in mind that they're speaking from their own perspective, is they felt that they had the largest footprint in this part of the gorge. But I can't remember who reminded me, I think the Nez Perce did just acquire some property just this side of Underwood at the base of the spur highway that goes up the river. So, one idea might be to have an individual, let's say the Yakima, with maybe the Warm Springs being the alternate. And then after a year, maybe the Warm Springs becomes the main member, and then Nez Perce becomes an alternate, and it just kind of rotates through. I mean, that's just one idea. I think the idea was just to find out if this is sounds like there's some general interest in exploring it. So again, just looking for some feedback.
I know back when we dealt with this in 2007, this is politically very difficult, and I think Jacob is hitting on some pretty important points. I vaguely remember back then that even Grand Ronde stepped up and said that claims historic reasons why they should be part of the process. So as we have to think about what we're opening up here. And I completely agree with Christy that communications is great. But is this a path to communications, or is it a path to wind up being a forum for intertribal issues?
Good point. Yeah.
Excellent points by both. Maybe we start by just inviting them to listen in on the meetings, just to give them opportunity to participate like we do with ODOT and WashDOT, and start small like that.
Yeah, it's a shame that CritFic isn't willing to play that role, because that would, they have the most directly involved in it in terms of the impact on fisheries, and they are intertribal. I'm wondering if we could maybe try to encourage them to step up a little bit on this.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think that the Gorge Commission has a tribal member, and there's, and it's over, they have two. So so do they have one from each tribe? Is that what you're saying, Kevin?
My understanding is that the governors of each state appoint those tribal representatives.
Okay, so they don't have, they have to work it out, so to speak, because every tribe doesn't have a voting member on the Gorge Commission. So they have figured out a way to, they have one person from each state that gets appointed.
Yeah,
so I was just
believe-
thinking,
yeah.
well, maybe it could be something like that, because they have worked out how to do that with the Gorge Commission.
Yeah, I believe the Yakima represents Washington, and the Warm Springs represents, or maybe it's the Umatilla represents the Oregon side. Well, it sounds like there's some interest, but maybe there's some more work for staff to do, and look, considering the intertribal politics, and sounds like maybe going back to CritFic and getting some feedback from them as well. So I'm kind of hearing that it's a good lofty goal, but not to necessarily get into the intertribal politics for the good of the bridge project. All right. Well, I'll keep working on that and keeping you abreast of what I learn there. And so the final item in the packet is the strategy principles. Last meeting, Michael McElway was nice enough to go through the strategic action plan, and I can certainly, I think, does everybody have a copy of that action plan that was submitted? I did send this right before our meeting. We did get a similar or an amended plan from Mayor Keithler, and I think that was after consultation with the Klickitat County contingency. And so I can certainly, I'll go ahead and bring up, while I'm looking for that, Mayor Keithler, do you want to maybe introduce the item as I look for your amended list to bring up?
Sure. Obviously, recalling back to our last meeting, one of the takeaways was to kind of evaluate those strategies that had been presented to us and give feedback. And so, as we mentioned, we had met with Senator King, and then we also convened and kind of reviewed those items together. And so the feedback that I shared on to Kevin was kind of our consolidated feedback, and nothing dramatic in terms of changes. I think we felt like a couple of the words could be a little bit more action oriented to really make sure that it was reflecting where we thought our energy was best spent. And then I would say that certainly some of our conversation with Senator King regarding P3s informed one of the recommendations on there, which Kevin, if you're not unable to find, oh, there you go. So
Yeah.
perfect.
Can you see that? Okay.
So basically, I think that the first or the current version of this there was an item 5 about reviewing different project approaches, and our recommendation was really to just combine that into 6. And I think this is going back even to some of the conversation today of just recognizing that ultimately the direction we've decided to move forward with is that a new entity will oversee this bridge. And so one of the roles that this group plays is really trying to give that new entity the best recommendations from the research and work that we've done collaboratively on the best way forward for the project to be delivered. So we removed the original item 5 and kind of combined that into a new item 6. I was trying to look for the original item 5 to see if I was remembering it correctly, Kevin, but I couldn't find it.
Let's see, identify and evaluate multiple project delivery options.
There you go.
Was the original 5.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that decision on item 3 from secure official and public agency support to elevate was really acknowledging that at this point, I feel like we have the support. It's more about making sure that we're at the top of the priority list or as high as we can be, and making that more the focus. And then, yes, that's right. On item 5, we were kind of saying that at this point, does it make sense to continue having that being its own item, or would it be best to consolidate it into the other item where it seems like it might have been implied already? Because obviously the transition to that group, I would imagine, will include the recommendations that we ultimately conclude are the best way forward.
Great, thank you for that. Appreciate the thought that went into this. Any thoughts from the working group on either the modified draft or the original comments?
Can you put the new one, the modified one, back up?
Yes.
I really like it because it's powerful words, but not a lot of words. And so it's can be easily worked into a great elevator speech.
The piece for number 5, consider all project delivery approaches and all funding options. The preferred approach will be determined only after regulatory, ownership, and funding issues are resolved. Are you saying to add that into number 7? Or what would be, I guess, number 6?
Yeah. More saying that as it relates to seeing this as kind of our marching orders going forward, does it make more sense to still acknowledge that we will be delivering a recommendation and exploring all those project delivery options, but that there's other areas that we're also emphasizing or focusing on, like just whether or not that needed to be its own dedicated, item.
I think it needs to be its own dedicated item still, even if we are kind of, so to speak, putting it on hold until we find out if we get more federal state money. I just don't want to lose sight of it. And if we don't have it somewhere, even if we don't say P3 in here, I think that, okay, maybe it's on the back burner for a little while. And maybe it never comes back on the burner because we get the funding. But I think just to not have it on there, I personally think that there should be some statement somehow in this list that states that we're looking at numerous options.
Could I weigh in at this time?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
I spent hours working on this strategy, and remember, it's not just these 5, 6, 7, 9 points. There's a whole lot of here's what we've done, here's what we're doing, here's what our targets are. And I can guarantee you that every one of these had a dozen different words inserted. It was elevate, it was build, it was support, it was increase. It's trying to find that right active verb trigger point. But one point is that this was prepared initially from the standpoint of the Port Commission. We were trying to bring this to our commission to say, does this feel right to you? And it's important to determine whether this is from a port perspective or from a bi-state working group perspective. And I think it's more valuable and useful for everyone if it can be resolved from the standpoint of the bi-state working group. But initially, that prepare to transition project leadership to another entity was essentially a policy decision or question to our board. Is that what we are saying? Are we saying we are working and spending a lot of money and staff time in order to prepare this to transition to another entity? And that was clarified by our commission. And once clarified, it leads to a number of other questions. When are you going to do that? What are your expectations when you do that, et cetera? So the reason that transition was a separate item was because of that standpoint of kind of a policy perspective. But it was also important to make sure, the second point is that this replacement strategy or strategic objectives is taken at a certain moment in time. It will likely change down the road. There will be other ways to word things, significant objectives, and more specific outcomes. But for the time being, where we are right now, it felt like, based on the fact that there's interest in P3, there's uncertainty about funding, but certainly possibility of design, build, design, build, there's all manner of different procurement methods. We needed to overtly say that we are looking at all options. We are keeping all our options on the table. And that felt like it was necessary then to have it as its own standalone point. And so there's two of these that kind of go together. Well, they all do, but we're trying to get to the point of project readiness where we have demonstrated credibility, we have demonstrable interest from both public and state of Washington, state of Oregon, and federal government, and they already have money in the game. So they've signaled they're interested in the project. And we are saying our intent is to get to the point where we can be a credible borrower from a TIFIA program. We can be a credible partner to a P3 entity. We can know that there's agency and elected official support to the extent that we can then make that big ask, take that next big step. So that project readiness threshold, which is conceptually at the end of, or near the end of phase 2, becomes really important. But that item correlates with the, we're working on different delivery methods, and we will determine the right delivery method when the work has been done, the options evaluated, and the project is ready. So those two they're conjoined in a way, but it felt important to separate those from the standpoint of strategically. So that's just a little explanation of what went into this. And I personally, and I'm not a member, but a staff person, and I guess speaking from the standpoint of the port, that still feels important to say the intent here at this point in time is to transition to another entity as a standalone point. Just my thoughts.
No, thank you. And in no way were we trying to overstep. The impression at the last meeting was that it was being presented to us to get feedback from all of us on how we were receiving these statements. And this is simply just our consolidated thoughts back, more or less. If everybody else sent theirs in individually, great. We're trying to, send a concise note onward of how we had our feedback from that presentation.
Yeah, there was one approach which just said it's one point that says build a bridge as soon as possible. That's our strategy. I was kidding on that.
I guess I'm confused. I thought that Mayor Kiesler was asked to look at this from the perspective of the bi-state working group and to recommend changes, and I thought that's what she did, and it looked like a great set of options to consider. And are you saying now that that's not what this document is, and we shouldn't have touched it? I'm confused.
I was simply trying to explain when it was first conceived and presented to our commission, there were 9 points. Based on feedback and discussion, there became 7. But it was still done at that point from the standpoint of the Port Commission. So from the Port standpoint, we're saying we are intentionally, we will transition this project to another entity, whether it is a P3 entity or whether it's a bi-state working group. That's effectively a strong and frankly very important policy statement from the standpoint of the Port. We want and need a bi-state working group entity, and for me, it'd be more effective if this is not seen from the Port standpoint, but from the bi-state working group standpoint, because it reflects all of our strategic objectives and the path we're on at this point in time. I was simply trying to explain the genesis for it and where it originated from and the rationale for the original points.
Okay, but you don't have objection to us coming up with something that more cleanly and clearly represents the group, the view of this group, and this group does have the Port representation on it. So I'm sure that Christy would review this with her commission if there was anything being done that needed to be reviewed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we're having this discussion. There's no question about that, but I think it is important to understand why the rationale for having the points laid out the way they were, so that you can consider what went into this, the thought process as you have your discussion.
No, I appreciate that. When you were speaking, it sounded to me like you were saying, don't touch these words. And it sounds like that's not what you're saying.
I never intended to say that, Arthur.
Thank you.
I like the Port's version personally, but that's just, I like them separated more and specific.
All right, Commissioner Benton, any thoughts?
No, I think I'm done with today's meeting.
Okay.
I'm burned out. No, the only thought I would have is I still think time is of the essence and it should be included somewhere. I appreciate not saying build it as fast as possible, but I think to leave that out completely and not acknowledge that the bridge is falling apart it doesn't paint a clear enough picture of what our strategy really is. But that's about all I've got for the rest of the meeting.
Well, I don't think we're going to last more than 5 minutes, so I think we're getting close. Do you want me to take another running go at this and try to bring back something for the next meeting for you to take a look at? It tries to incorporate a little bit of both.
I guess, is this strategy internal for us alone? Is this strategy between us and the Port working together? Or is this an external, what we're going to send out? Everything I'm doing is going off the MOU. I think the MOU was absolutely well written. It plays all these discussions we're having. It's already in the MOU. And all the discussions, we're just rehashing the same thing. It seems that we've already agreed on in the MOU. And I'm one of those go forth and do good work type of guys.
Gotcha.
I mean, should we at this point have a show of hands or anything that would, I've heard both views. Should we get the voting members to vote
come to consensus?
Well, before we do that, could I make a recommendation that maybe Kevin brings this modified draft to the next Port meeting, and maybe between the commission, the staff and the commission of the Port, we can maybe massage it a little bit more to try and make sure that everyone's voices here is included. and then bring it back to the next meeting.
Sounds good.
Okay,
I like that.
let me take this back and I'll bring it back to you at the next meeting. So I will,
And on top of that, maybe it would be good, and Marla, I'd love to have you included, if maybe Kevin and Marla and myself, maybe we could just meet and just figure out a way to maybe make sure that we add a couple more words in there, and then we can take that to the port and then bring it back here.
perfect. Okay, I will, I'll get a meeting set up with you, Christy, Mayor Keithler, and myself. And we'll try to iron out some of the wording there.
I want to recognize Bob's comment that he made about urgency. And if you're going to work on this anyway, I would suggest that we have some small portion in that first paragraph at the top that talks a little bit more about urgency.
Perfect.
I agree. And on that line, I know everyone's burnout, and this has been a very long meeting. Kevin or Michael, can you update the group just really quickly on what the port is doing, speaking of urgency, just to update all of these elected officials on what the port is doing in the short term to try and mitigate the weight reduction on the bridge? Or is everyone familiar with what's going on with that? Because I'm hearing a lot about it from constituents.
Well, be glad to give an update if people or would like one.
Just the quick and dirty 1 minute.
It's 3:29.
Well, there's several businesses that are primarily initially impacted, and a number of those we're working with. One is staging some gravel on the side of the river for a large construction project. Another was setting up a small temporary batch plant up at the lower mill to work through some concrete issues. But in the sort of medium term, we've retained the bridge engineer to essentially evaluate the structural condition of the bridge at those points that the ODOT engineer utilized or identified that were substandard and drove the weight reduction. Part of that, it gets complicated, but there's a number of them that relate to gusset plates and the trusses. And our engineer believes that by doing some live load testing of those points, it can effectively demonstrate that they meet the standard already, don't need to be repaired. So unfortunately, the additional cost of that sub-consult work is almost $200,000. So there's a price point decision about whether we can go ahead and do that live load testing. But the idea here is to evaluate the condition of the bridge at those critical points, identify what specifically needs to be done in order to eliminate those as substandard locations, and then what needs to be done to bring it up to standard. Probably going to take about a year to go through that process and get approval from ODOT. But there is a decision point likely this fall where we will better understand the cost of bringing the weight limit back up versus effectively the amount of funding we have to do that. I hope that helped some.
It's only 3:31, Michael. You did good.
I ran over. Look, I have another meeting, so I'm gonna have to bail out. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Michael. All right, everybody. I will. This archive will be posted on our YouTube channel in a day or two, and I'll follow up on those action items and get back in touch with you for a meeting in May. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Kevin.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.